Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Flynn and I am the owner and maker of Flynn Sisters Boutique. And today we have a little bit of a different video planned. I am going to be refinishing the surface of my shop desk. So the desk that I film everything on is absolutely trashed. I really am disappointed at my purchase of this desk because it did not take long for it to just get completely trashed. So in this video, we are going to be refinishing it. We're going to be doing a kind of vinyl wrap, and then I will be doing an epoxy pour over it, and I'm going to walk you through the whole thing. I'm really excited. I've never done this before. Might be a total mess, but anything will be better than what we have on this tabletop now. I'm going to have all the products that you see in this video listed and linked down below in the description box. You might even find some discount codes for you there as well. So that's enough chit chat for me. Let's go ahead and get started. First step is to clean up the desk really well. I'm using some Dawn dish soap and the scrubby side of an old sponge. I want to try and get off any kind of like tape or whatever. I have so much stuff stuck to this desk. After I gave it a good scrub down, I did let it soak on there for a few minutes. And then I came back with a scraper tool to just scrape off any stuck on epoxy. I also went over this whole thing with a 60 grit sanding block just to really smooth things out. After sanding, I went over it with some rubbing alcohol on a paper towel to clean up any debris. Next, I masked off the bottom of my table just along the edges here. And then after I got all that tape down, I went over it with my vinyl scraper to make sure that it was pressed on there really well. I also masked off the legs of my table with some painter's tape at the bottom. And then I also wrapped the remainder of the legs with saran wrap just to make sure I didn't get any stray epoxy on there. I got the table all masked off. I also laid down some heavy duty plastic to make sure that we didn't make a mess on the floor. Next, I'm going to apply the vinyl. The reason why I want to apply this marble print vinyl first is because I don't want to have to try and create this type of look myself with epoxy. I'm not that talented, okay? So I thought it would be really cool to put this down first and then do our epoxy marbling over it to give us some depth. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but we're going to see. We're going to wrap this table the same way I would wrap a cup. So we want to make sure we have overhang on top, bottom, and side to side. So ideally we would want 1 inch of overhang all over. All right, so I just kind of cut round about the length that I need. And before I apply this, I'm just going to go over my table real quick with a tack cloth to make sure I don't have any sort of debris that would prevent us from getting a really smooth finish. All right, and so next I'm going to peel back a couple inches of the backing paper on the straight edge of my vinyl. And once we have that paper backing peeled back just a little bit, we're going to line up that straight edge with the first straight edge of our table, and we're going to anchor down that first piece of exposed vinyl. Once I have that anchored down, I'm going to stretch my vinyl out over the whole table and make sure I have everything lined up straight enough to where I won't miss any spots, like I won't fall short towards the end. Once I'm sure that everything is straight and lined up, I'm going to start smoothing everything out with my scraper tool. This is an 8-inch scraper. I originally got this to apply wallpaper to my walls, so it's absolutely perfect for this type of project. What we're going to do is slowly pull back the paper backing while applying hard pressure to our vinyl, pushing towards that open end and the top and bottom of our table. All right, so we're trying to push out any kind of air bubbles and wrinkles this way, moving very slowly down the table. You almost want to push your scraper into that paper backing to remove it. So in other words, you're not peeling it back with your hands, you're pushing it back with the scraper as you're applying that vinyl to the table. Along the way, I did use my craft knife to pop any kind of bubbles that were just really stubborn that I couldn't, push out with my scraper. This was about a 20 to 30 minute process. You do really need to put your back into it to get everything pushed down. You want to avoid stretching your vinyl at all because you don't want to fall short on one side or the other if things get kind of crooked. And then once I got to the end, I just kind of wrapped it around that corner and pushed it down really well with my scraper and then trimmed off the excess with my craft knife. After I trimmed the excess, I went over just the corners with my sanding block to smooth everything out. This is just a 60 grit sanding block, and it's going to leave a really nice, clean finish. For the edges, I cut strips that were just a little wider than the edge itself, smoothed it on with a felt-tipped vinyl scraper tool. And then once I had it all applied on there, again, I just trimmed the excess with my craft knife. I also trimmed the excess with my craft knife from the sides of the table where I had about a 1/4 inch of overhang on either side. Again, every time I trimmed the edge with my craft knife, I went over it with my sanding block just to give it a really smooth finish. Don't worry too much about your application of this vinyl because it's just going to be sort of like a base color or a base image, if you will, for our end product. So if you have any stubborn bubbles that you weren't able to get out, don't worry. It's going to look great after we epoxy it. All right, and now we're ready for our epoxy pour. You want to make sure that your table is nice and level. I use some shims from the hardware store because my garage floor is definitely not level. And then of course, suit up with your PPE. I'm putting bags on my feet just in case I trace any epoxy drips off of my protected area there. I don't want to get epoxy on my feet or anything like that. First coat of epoxy, we initially mixed 36 ounces of epoxy, and that was not enough. I wish I would have mixed 64 ounces, but you live and learn. So this first layer that I'm putting on here is 18 ounces, and I'm just spreading it all over the table. This is just the clear epoxy. With the other 18 ounces that I mixed in a few different colorants. So I had 2 different kinds of glitter. I had a gray, like a dark gray charcoal mica powder. And then I also had white epoxy dye. All right, so I didn't mix my colorants until after I put this smooth coat onto the table. I wanted to do this clear coat first to give my colorants something to glide over, all right? Which they didn't glide too much because again, I didn't mix enough epoxy. I really should have done at least 64 ounces, but that's okay. We made it work. This table is about 72 inches long by I think 24 inches wide. So to give you an idea of just how much epoxy you would need to do a project of this size. When I drizzled the colorants in and my glitter, I sort of just drizzled them in randomly. And then I went over with my hands to sort of finger paint them in for a more organic look. Wasn't really thrilled with how this turned out. But it was a trust the process kind of moment, okay? I started with the white epoxy dye and kind of just swirled that around with my hands. Then I started going in with the glitter. I had like a really sparkly white glitter. This is Opal Majesty from Peachy Olive Glitters. And I sort of just threw that in willy-nilly. Then I had an extra fine silver and gold kind of mix. This is Silver Bells, again from Peachy Olive Glitters. I just willy-nilly at this point. I also was running out of time. So it was really hot in my garage, which was a huge mistake because my work time was way too short. I did not have enough time to really manipulate things how I wanted because everything was curing at this moment. And I was panicking to try and get everything on there as quickly as possible. And I wish I would have stopped at this point and not have added the black, or I guess it's gray. The gray colorant that I added towards the end was just way too overpowering and too much for what I really wanted to go for. After I drizzled in that gray mica, I got out my heat gun and just sort of started blooming that mica powder into more organic shapes than what was on there as a drizzle. I also tried to kind of fan things out with my fingers, obviously with a gloved hand, just again to make things look a little more organic. If I could have gone back in time, I would have never added the gray lines because I just wasn't happy with how those looked, and would have been happier with just like the white and the glitter. But whatever, no big deal. So here at this point, I'm expecting my colorants to move way more than they were, but they couldn't because one, I didn't have enough epoxy on there, and two, everything was starting to cure. At the very end, I sprinkled in some extra glitter. This is Galadriel from Peachy Olive Glitters, and I just kind of sprinkled it in willy-nilly. We let that dry overnight, and then I was ready to put on like my final coat. You definitely want to put a clear coat over all those colorants. This time I got smart and got a 64-ounce container. And I'm using Alumilite's Amazing Clear Cast. I used the same epoxy on the last coat too. I just had forgotten to mention that. Okay, and I'm going to use the lines already marked on my container to measure my epoxy, pouring part B first, and then we'll pour part A over it. I'm using a paint mixer drill attachment to mix this much epoxy. These attachments are really cool because it's going to spin the epoxy downwards so it doesn't all spray up while you're mixing, even at a higher speed. Definitely turn your drill motor to the lowest speed setting, and then you're going to be mixing for about 20 minutes or so. This is going to create a lot of bubbles in your epoxy, which is fine because this is a thin pour and we can easily torch them out. But it will be hard to see if you got it all the way mixed. So I just kind of make sure that I'm constantly scraping the sides and the bottom, and you can feel on the side of the container once it starts to get warm. I can also see that there's no ribbons or streaks left. And then once I'm done mixing, you want to take a popsicle stick to kind of scrape off all the excess resin from that attachment. And then I put it in an extra cup to clean later with some rubbing alcohol and paper towels. Out of the 64 ounces of epoxy that we mixed here, I'm going to pour 18 ounces into its own container and mix in a good amount of white epoxy dye. I would say at least like 12 drops for this much. And then I'm going to mix that in with a popsicle stick. And then in my large container, I'm going to put about a half a teaspoon of Cullen from Feather Bear Bling. This is like a microfine epoxy additive. It's like a silver flake glitter, but it's super, super microfine. And it's just going to add a little extra sparkle to our final coat. Again, I'm going to mix that in just with a popsicle stick. Now we're ready to roll. I'm going to first pour on the clear epoxy, or the one with the little fine flake glitter additive. And I'm going to use my hand to just smooth it out over all surfaces of our table. This time I'm going to make sure that I get the outer edges of my table. I didn't care so much about those before when I did the first pour, mainly because I didn't mix enough epoxy. Now that we got the big tub, we are going to make sure we get everything nice and covered. So yeah, 64 ounces is definitely the minimum for a table this size. Once I've got that clear all spread out nice, I'm going to go in with the white epoxy, and I'm just going to finger paint that in kind of willy-nilly with my glove. Once I've got it evenly distributed throughout the table, I'm going to go back with both hands, just kind of swirling around to make it look a little more organic. And this white epoxy was the perfect thing for this table. I really needed to mute some of those dark colors to make it less distracting, because remember, I am going to be filming on this table. I don't want anything too abrasive or like distracting or ornate looking in the background of my videos. After we've got that all done, and I'm sure we've got every spot covered on the table, I'm gonna go over with my torch and pop any bubbles. With the lighting just right and at the right angle, you can see just where and how those bubbles pop with the torch. You definitely wanna get a big torch like this for these type of projects. And then once we've got that all torched, again, I'm gonna let it dry overnight. After that's been drying for about 2 to 3 hours, you want to come back and remove the tape. Do not wait for everything to be fully dry before you remove this tape. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time getting a really clean edge. Sometimes even by the 2 to 3 hour mark, it'll still be too dry, but you can take a heat gun to the edge and that'll help release the tape. If you have any stubborn drips that won't come off, you can just kind of shave them away with a sharp craft knife. Here's how it turned out. I just love all the depth and detail. I also got a 19 by 24 inch tempered glass mat to put over the top of this, where I'll be doing most of my work, just to keep this protected, because this epoxy is not like the hardest finish in the entire world. There's still stuff that can stain and damage it. So I thought the glass mat was a good idea because I can easily razor scrape stuff off if anything gets on there, and it'll protect the desktop. I also removed the legs of the table and put it on top of my 2 gray little chest of drawers, and used a silicone mat between the tabletop and the top of the drawers to keep it steady. And this table actually feels like a really nice steady table, unlike what it used to be when it was unstable and wobbly and just really cheap feeling. What a turnaround. I absolutely love it. If you guys like some of the accessories and details that I have in my shop, I will link them down below in the description box. Thank you so much for watching my video, and we'll see you again soon. And a big thank you to all of our Flynn Sisters exclusive members. Thank you for your pledge. Your support means the world to our channel. If you love this video, you could check out our last video here. Also be sure to find us on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and of course subscribe for all our new videos that come out every Wednesday and Saturday. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.